Okay, now we're going to talk about the fetal heart and circulation. So the types of circulation. We have coronary circulation. That, remember, blood in the heart doesn't actually nourish the heart. So the blood is pumping through the heart, but it doesn't actually do anything to nourish the heart tissue itself. So coronary arteries actually bring the blood to the heart tissue, and coronary veins empty into the right atrium, bring the waste from the heart tissue itself. So coronary circulation goes from the aorta back to the right atrium and only in the heart, okay, to the actual heart muscle cells. So the left ventricle works the hardest. Remember, it has to pump blood to the whole body, so it actually does get the most blood flow in coronary circulation. So coronary circulation, coronary arteries. So the blood vessels that you see on the outside of the heart, lining the outside of the heart, those are the coronary arteries and the coronary veins, and they're bringing blood to and from the heart tissue itself. Systemic circulation, like the whole system. It goes from the heart to the body, starting with the aorta, and then from the body back to the heart, from the inferior and superior vena cava. So the aorta sends the oxygen-rich blood out, and the superior and inferior vena cava bring the oxygen-poor blood back. The exchange of waste and nutrients happens in capillaries. Remember, the arteries get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until where capillaries exchange, and then the veins get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until we go back to the heart. So systemic circulation from the heart to the body and back to the heart. And then we have pulmonary circulation, and it goes from the heart to the lungs. And remember, that blood does not have oxygen. Well, it's very oxygen poor, and it goes from the pulmonary arteries, and it goes to the lungs, and then it comes back to the heart through the pulmonary veins. So pulmonary circulation, it sends blood from the heart to the lungs, and then from the lungs back to the heart. So it goes out without oxygen, comes back with oxygen. Now, a fetal heart has some modifications. And why? Well, the lungs aren't functional for oxygenation. So the fetus gets its oxygen from the placental blood flow from its parent, okay? So it doesn't send blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen because it's not breathing, okay? So there are two main structures that we're going to learn that help the fetal heart function effectively. So there's the foramen ovale. It's a literal sort of hole in the heart. It's an opening that connects the right atrium and the left atrium. Now, why? Well, remember, the right ventricle right here would pump blood through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Well, the lungs aren't working to have oxygen, so I kind of want to skip this. So the easiest way to skip it is to connect the right atrium and the left atrium, and so that blood would go directly this way and not go into the right ventricle and to the lungs. So it helps to bypass the lungs, so the fetal heart works a little bit more effectively because it doesn't need to waste time going to the lungs. The foramen ovale closes, well, starts to close as soon as a baby takes its first breath. And it should be fully sealed by a couple months old, but certainly by 6 months old. If it doesn't close, that's something that requires surgery. Now, the ductus arteriosus. So it's this right here, okay? So remember, we're again wanting to bypass the lungs as much as possible because the lungs aren't doing anything to bring oxygen. So the ductus, a duct, arteriosus in an artery, is a little tube that connects this as the pulmonary artery, and this, you should know, is the aorta. So it's a tube that connects the pulmonary artery and the aorta. Why? Well, the pulmonary artery takes blood to the lungs, but I don't really want it going to the lungs. So I'm going to send it to the aorta instead. So we had the foramen ovale, which was allowing blood to flow across like this from the right atrium to the left atrium. But it doesn't get 100% of the blood. So some is going to get into the right ventricle. So this ductus arteriosus tries to send any of the blood that did manage to get into the right ventricle into the aorta instead of to the lungs. So again, it serves to help bypass the lungs. So the ductus arteriosus starts to narrow after a baby's first breath, and it fully closes earlier by about 2 to 3 weeks. Again, if it doesn't close, that's problematic and may require surgery. So again, a fetal heart has the ductus arteriosus and the foramen ovale, and a newborn heart should not have those things. Why does a fetal heart have them? To bypass the lungs. But once a baby starts breathing, it needs to send the blood to the lungs to get oxygen. Now, one major defect in a heart, and we're going to learn about this in a movie, is tetralogy of Fallot. It's congenital. That means you're born with it. It is 4, tetralogy 4. It has 4 heart defects, and it definitely requires surgery. These babies who have tetralogy of Fallot are often called blue babies, and because not enough blood is getting to the lungs, so they don't get enough oxygen, so their skin is literally tinted blue. Without surgery, they would die. So cyanosis is that bluish discoloration of the skin. So blue babies have that tint to their skin because they're not getting enough blood flow to their lungs. Okay, it 100% of the time requires heart surgery, or the child will eventually die. In class, we're going to practice with a blue kit. And that's it. That's fetal heart and circulation. I hope you learned something new today.